Welcome back. You're watching Business Insight, and of course we are live from KBC, that is Broadcasting House. Tonight, of course, we want to focus on one of the big four agenda, and that is manufacturing. And we are joined by Sylvester Makaka. He's the Executive Officer, Energy Advisor at Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And of course, he's the man who knows where to touch to bring down the cost of energy in the country. Thank you so much indeed, Sylvester, for joining us here. The question comes, the government is talking big about manufacturing sector, and we know for sure increasing contribution to GDP from 9% to 20% in less than 5 years is not a walk in the park. Is the government walking the talk?
Let me start by saying thank you for calling me to this show, at least to shed some light on what the manufacturing sector is gearing itself towards to achieve this very big target set by the government. One, we've seen accelerated investments in the energy sector over the last 5 years or so, and this is started to bear fruit. We've seen concerted efforts towards the geothermal. We've seen investments coming in wind, and there's a lot of campaign on renewable energy in Kenya, as currently we are. We are one of the richest renewable energy mix country in Africa. Yeah. So the government, I think, is gearing in the right direction. Yeah.
When it comes to investing in the manufacturing sector, I want to find out from you, when the Jubilee administration came into power, you know, their clarion call was to push energy production in this country from, back then it was 1,700 to around 5,000 by the year 2018. Yes. This dream has largely failed because presently we are doing about 2,300 megawatts.
Thereabout.
What happened?
You know, energy is not a commodity that you'll manufacture and store. So the question we ask ourselves is how much do we need at what time? And who bears the costs of manufacturing or generating this energy? And as to manufacturers, so I think we sat down and agreed with the government that we are ready to pay energy at cost, but don't overburden us by putting in capacities that we don't need now. And that being the informing agenda, we said we shall invest as we grow. And currently, I think the energy demand in this country is growing at a rate of around 6 to 7%. So if we grow at that rate, given our current capacity, it means we should be injecting in an additional 250 megawatts every year going forward. So that then becomes our check that we cannot have an oversupply of capacity, then that burden is controlled or managed. Yes.
But of course, between me and you, we know for sure that this is not happening. I mean, we are not adding enough energy into the national grid, or we are not in tandem with the demand, with the growth of the demand. So what happens, you know, in the next 4 years?
From the strategic point of view, if we are growing at 7% energy demand, it means we only have 3 years until we hit them.
We exhaust.
We exhaust whatever capacity we have now. That means we still need to invest in the energy sector. We must invest in the infrastructure in terms of transmission, and in terms of distribution. We must invest in terms of generation. And of course, the government opened the generation space to private investors. And we must invest in new industries that then will be consuming this power that comes on board. Yes.
And we know for sure, you know, that the private sector has somehow responded to government initiative, you know, to invest in within the energy sector. And we know one of the projects, and one of the biggest wind power project in Africa is in the northern part of this country, and that is the Lake Turkana wind power project with a capacity of 310 megawatts. Almost 1 year since the project was commissioned. We are yet to start to benefit from this energy for obvious reasons. The government has not put in place the infrastructure network to help tap that power from northern Kenya, into the national grid. Isn't this, isn't the government, throwing a spanner into the whole works?
You got to understand that government works with partners. And the case of Lake Turkana transmission line, it was to move from Lake Turkana to Suswa.
Yeah.
That line was contracted and the project started off.
Yeah.
But the contractor who was then on the ground went into problems. We are not going to discuss that. But I think as of the latest development is that that project will be on course soon. Yes,
we are talking about September this year.
Yes, we've lost time in terms of evacuating power from that, the wind farm. We've lost, this happens to be the biggest wind farm in Africa currently. That being the case, there'll be teething problems, there'll be learning lessons to go by, and it is actually 300-400 kilometers from Nairobi. You can imagine what we are talking about. Yeah. So with that understanding that the first contractor went into problems, the government has made efforts to secure another contractor, and the job is on course. So it's just a matter of time. Kenyans should be patient. They'll be enjoying the benefits of the wind farm from Lake Turkana. Yes.
And let's look at the cost, of energy here in the country. Yes. At 14 cents per kilowatt hour, I mean, we cannot compare this with Tanzania, which charges about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Look at South Africa, about 4.5 cents. Ethiopia here, about 4.
Yes.
We have Egypt here, 5 cents. Yeah. The question is, who are we competing with? Can we claim to be a competitive country when it comes to attracting manufacturers into Kenya?
Kenya is an active player in the COMESA region, the COMESA market, and it's also an active player in the Africa market. But with the open market, we're getting products from all over the world coming to Kenya. The textile industry will tell you everything is coming in from wherever and finding its way into this market. So we should interrogate ourselves. One, what policy steps have we taken as a country? We took a policy step and said we shall charge energy at cost. South Africa, you've mentioned South Africa, is moving from a regime where everything was subsidized to a regime where now they are actually following what Kenya is doing. Ethiopia is a unique case because Ethiopia has all its generation, more or less all, from hydro, which comes in much cheaper on the same scale compared to Kenya, which has a mix of hydro, geothermal, wind, solar, and the petrothermal. What drives our cost higher? Two things. One is that we have a lot of petrothermals, which then the fuel component pushes our costs higher. Number two, the energy sector in Kenya is heavily taxed. And there are a lot of attendant taxes that are passed through to the consumer that to you will reflect as the bill, but the energy cost is different, and the tax component is also different. So the two make up the energy cost. What we can do, or what we need to do, is look at the cost structure. Then we are comparing apple to apple. Maybe our cost structure is to finance government operations, while Egypt's cost or Ethiopia cost structure is just to take care of power generation. And where are we now as a sector? As the electricity sector, we are actually at the development stage where all major infrastructure projects are coming in now. We've just formed the KETRACO to take care of the transmission. The Kenya Power needs money to finance the development of transmission lines and distribution substations. So we are actually at a development stage. And this is a sacrifice that we need to pay to be able to enjoy the stability we are looking for.
Yes. And of course, you're talking about taxes, within the sector. Let me take you through some of some of the costs that you have to bear within this area. You have the fixed charge, you have the fuel cost charge, you have the inflation adjustment charges, you have the Water Resources Management Authority, WARMA. You have the Energy Regulatory Commission, you have the Rural Electrification Authority, that is RARE, you have the Forex adjustment. I mean, good Lord Jesus. Let me stop at that point. The question comes, Do you feel there are some components within that area that we can slash off?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is the conversation we got to have. One, why should we be paying for Warma? Because this water is not, the water that is being used for generation is not stopping at generation.
It is doing other things.
It's doing other things. Okay, let's assume that Warma needs this money. For what? If it is rehabilitating the catchment areas, then we need a conversation so that we agree this Warma levy is for rehabilitation of the catchment areas. Then we know, we give them targets. We want this much coverage every year. New plantations, new forest cover. But just giving Warma money and not making them accountable for it just because the water is flowing, we need to have a conversation. If we are looking at the inflation, everybody is subjected to this inflation. It is not only the energy sector. Even the manufacturers are subjected to the same inflation. How long or who should be protected against inflation and who should not? That's a conversation we need to have so that we know whatever the consumer pays is the rightful cost of energy.
Tell me this, Makaka.
Yes.
Have you ever tried to advance this discussion with the policymakers?
You know, under the KM advocacy pillar, we engage with government every now and then. And this engagement is not one event or it's a day's event. It's an ongoing discussion. And as we move on, these are some of the discussions we are bringing on the table to see where then can we be looking at the energy cost, drill deep, and try to see which taxes can be eliminated. Yes.
Have you ever raised the issue of Warma, for example?
Warma is an agenda on the table now.
What are you telling the government?
That unless it is defined on what this levy should go and do, what are we achieving with this levy? It's not just for the water. Yeah, with Warma. One, if it's not defined, then we don't need it. But it should be defined on what Warma are going to do with this money.
What is the government telling you?
We are still talking.
How far have you talked?
We have put it at the policy table, so let us discuss now. We
you
cannot
are at that point of discussion.
Yeah, discussion.
And the other issue then comes.
Yes.
The energy component within the manufacturing sector forms about, is it 35 or 40%?
On the highest, although it depends from industry to industry.
If we were to address the issues around the electricity or the energy sector, by how much are we likely to bring down the cost of manufacturing in this country?
We had targets on what should be the reasonable competitive energy pricing in Kenya. And we saw a level of 9 to 10 cents US being a fair value for
9
money.
to 10 cents US dollars.
Yes. The reason why it has not been achievable is because we are still using a lot of diesel and heavy fuel oil, which then pushes up the cost because of the fuel adjustment component. So that being the case, and then we are looking at a reduction of anything between 3 US cents on average industrial bill, considering that the taxes are still embedded. So if then we look at the cost, the taxation element will take around 40–45% of that. So you can imagine where we are. And then we are looking at 7–8 cents as the true cost of energy in this country. So that means you'll have brought down the 25% component of manufacturing energy cost by 50%. That means you'll have brought down the cost of manufacturing by 10%.
10%?
Yes.
And of course, there will be a trickle-down effect, on the Wanjiko.
There is the cascade effect of cheaper production is, then you are able to sell more even to external markets because you are able to compete with other products that are competing in the beyond the boundary, the Kenya boundary. You'll be able to be competitive in the COMESA, so you'll access markets in the south, you'll access markets in Egypt, you'll access markets in ECOWAS, because now you'll be saying we are fairly priced. But as long as our prices are still high, cost of manufacturing is still high, the manufacturers are crying, then we are saying, what incentives will government give to manufacturing so that they can be able to export to the larger market?
Is it high time we rethink the issue of government subsidizing the cost of energy?
We've come from that subsidy regime. That's where we were in the 80s and 90s. There was a subsidy extended to energy sector. The question is it sustainable? Because one, somebody must pay for it.
Yeah.
It's either you are paying for it directly or government is footing your bill and charging you in other things. So there is no end to subsidy. The only sure way to understand the subsidy is to stop it so that people pay a fair value.
How are they doing it in China?
You know, we don't really want to look at how China is doing it, but you know, China has a bigger scale. If we are talking of 2,300 megawatts here, it's a very small on Chinese scale.
It's a small town in China.
So with a bigger scale, your volume advantage just works in for you. Then you look at Chinese mix. What are they generating from? There's a lot of hydro also. There's a lot of coal, and there's a lot of nuclear. So that alone makes them competitive. If the government decides not to tax the energy sector and pass that benefit to the manufacturer, so that now the manufacturer now brings in the benefit effect to the consumers and to the cost of products, fair. But China has a bigger scale.
Tell me this, for heaven's sake, I mean, why do we still talk about pure thermal power in this country when you put into consideration the fact that we are endowed with huge geothermal potential in this country to the tune of about 10,000 megawatts? Why should we be talking about the expensive thermal power in this country, for crying out loud?
It's good you have asked that question, because I think everybody wonders the same way. But let me tell you this, that one, petrothermal plants have two distinct advantages. They are quick to establish. They don't have that long duration of erection and feasibility and all that. So you can say, I want a plant here in the next 1 year, and it will be there. Number two, they have the flexibility to be switched off at will. You can switch them off now and start them 1 hour later. Where does that put them in our mix? It puts them in an advantage position that when we require them at peak time, you can call them and they come in immediately, and we manage the peak. And when you don't need them after peak, you switch them off. So those makes the thermal plants advantageous to Kenya today. Compare that to a geothermal, it will take you more than 5 years to establish. One, you have to do a feasibility, you have to do drilling, and then look for an investor to put there the generation plants. It takes a long time. The wind power plant has taken us how many years? 8, 9, just talking about it. Now we are saying it is there. So if you look at where we've come from and where we are now, thermal plants have played their role. The question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we plan their exit? Because do we need them in the next 5, 10 years? That's the question we should be asking now. How do we plan the exit? But not whether we require them or not. We required them at that time, at that point in time, because there was need for such kind of plants. Even now as we speak, we've just gone through the drought. The hydro levels are not very good, and we require them to stabilize the power sector. Yes.
And still, I mean, There was a time Kenya was talking about, venturing into nuclear energy, and we know for sure that nuclear energy is one of the cheapest source of energy. Should we advance this discussion and ensure that by the year 2030 we have a nuclear-powered power plant in Kenya?
If you have a vision for Kenya and you have a vision for Africa, we are at a level we cannot say we are consuming energy on global scale. Look at the per capita consumption of Kenya. 2014, it was just hardly 160 kilowatt hours per capita. Compared to developed nations where you are talking of 5,000-6,000 kilowatt hours per person, you can see where we have to go. This population, how much of this population is electrified? Are we industrialized? So looking into the future and looking at the resources we have at present, the vision carriers of this country have thought in their wisdom that we shall deplete the geothermal. We will not be investing in hydro anymore. The wind and all that will be all over exhausted. Where do we go? And that's where now nuclear comes in.
Yeah.
So nuclear is for the vision carriers looking far into the future and saying it has to come in at some point. And I think what they have set up is the board to try and think conclusively around the nuclear agenda.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your final remarks. If you were at a position, to advise government on this issue, what would you tell them?
On the issue of energy in general?
Yes.
Manufacturing sector in this country needs government support.
Yeah.
And that government support is what is in the government's control. And what is in government control is bring down the cost of energy. And how we shall bring that cost of energy, it's a discussion we need to have so that we bring it down. Whether we want to reduce on taxation, whether we want to invest more in geothermal so that we have cheap power or competitive power, that is the direction we need to go.
All right.
And my final remarks, this week has been our Energy Management Award Week, and we are hosting our Emma Awards tomorrow on 13th at Safari Park. We want to celebrate champions of energy efficiency from industry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very well. Thank you very much indeed, Sylvester Makaka, for joining us here.
Great.
Sylvester Makaka is the Executive Officer, Energy Advisor at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, joining us here to help us understand how government can bring down the cost of energy, which in return will bring down the cost of production in this country.